On this episode of the Dairyland Initiative podcast, we're going to be talking about overstocking. Hi, I'm Courtney Hallbach.
And I'm Nigel Cook,
And this is the Dairyland Initiative podcast,
where we get to discuss issues related to the housing and management of dairy cattle.
Let's dive in.
Well, today, Courtney, we're going to put all that ventilation stuff behind us.
And move on to a topic that you've been wanting to get to.
I have. It's this question of overstocking. So that's the question of the day, to overstock or not to overstock.
And I think you have some opinions on this.
I do have some. That question's actually evolved. It's been changing over time because 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the whole game was trying to work out how much we could overstock and get away with so that we could enhance economic returns without hurting the cow too much.
And from what I've heard, when I started working in this industry, it's been totally acceptable to overstock at 1.2 cows per stall.
Yeah, the old 1.2. Yeah, there was some economic work done by Albert DeVries in Florida, basically using the available information of the time about what overstocking was doing to cows. And north of the border in Canada, they've had their pro-action using 1.2 as the guideline, the threshold for determining the acceptable level of overstocking. But I think things have changed over the intervening years.
Yeah, because you've said here in the office, things have changed over time, and a lot of these issues are cyclical. Like I think before I came on, overstocking was a thing, and then it wasn't an issue, and then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and here we are. So
yeah.
What have you learned?
And now now is the question is how much overstocking can we do without harming any cow?
Because it's getting back to the
it's
welfare.
That animal welfare question.
Piece.
And the answer is, because there's been intervening work, not very much. You can't do very much overstocking without harming some of the cows.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing gets better other than the bottom line. So all of the things that cows are worried about gets more challenging when you add more cows. Why would a farmer overstock, Courtney?
It probably looks good in their milk check.
That's the issue. By adding a few extra cows, you don't change the infrastructure. You ship more milk from those cows, and it's diluting fixed costs and making you more money. So when times are hard, you can absolutely understand why this takes place.
And I'm guessing the rewards that you're seeing in the milk check with overstocking is a short-term thing. You see it up front, or could you see it?
I think you see it immediately. I think that's the gift. You add a few more cows, those cows contribute more milk to the tank, and you see that in the check straight away.
Mm-hmm. But does that last?
That's the question. Yeah, we'll try and answer that here. There's a downside to this, and the downside is really from that animal welfare perspective. Mm-hmm. So it increases the number of cows. That sustainability discussion we had way back in our first episode. If you've got more cows, you're creating more manure, emitting more methane, you're having a greater negative impact on the environment. Mm-hmm. And there's the social trust piece that we've talked about. There's the potential to erode that trust by adding more cows, creating more competition.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite video, this is an old video, it's captured these two frame every 30 seconds or so. We call this 5 beats 9. It's cow 5. She basically evicts the white cow from a stall, steals her lying space, and that poor old white cow's going, what the heck just happened?
Heck? Poor 9.
It's a demonstration of what's happening in the cow environment, in these freestall environments. As you add more cows, you add more competition for resources. Mm-hmm. So the resources are food, resting space, water, and area to socialize. And so you can kind of create this competition. And we all kind of understand that cows are incredibly adaptable, and they'll tolerate some level of competition. This was from our good friend Cass Tucker. Basically went to all of the literature on the impact of overstocking on lying time. So a number of studies, and they basically summarize the data relative to normal stocking density. So that is 1 cow per stall. And it is absolutely amazing to me how these studies line up in terms of their impact on lying time. So this is increasing stocking density here, and you can see there is a negative impact on lying time. Super consistent across a lot of studies done in different climates, different circumstances. But it's basically showing you that as you move from 1 cow per stall to 1.5 cow per stall, you're losing about 15% of your lying time.
And then that's not good when you're trying to optimize rest at 12 hours a day.
Well, I was going to say it doesn't sound that much. 15%. It's not too bad.
I don't know. That if I'm looking at 8 hours a day for my resting time and I'm losing 15%.
So what is the 15% in absolute hours? If we're trying to get cows to lie for 12, then you're closer to something like 10.5 hours or something like that, which is our whole sand mattress discussion. Yes. Those are the numbers that we were emphasizing that was such a big impact. That's not as much as the heat stress losses, but a fair chunk of that.
Yeah.
So it is a big deal. Losing 15% of your lying time is a big deal. And I know in parts of the world they don't overstock. And legislation or welfare codes say they limit 1 cow per stall, or even actually less than that in some circumstances. But honestly, I don't think they should be so smug, because it's more complicated.
Yeah, and I've gone to plenty of European countries where they limit 1 cow per stall, but then they forget about those other areas that are also important, like water access and feed access.
Yeah, bunk space is a concern. And look at the cow in this stall. Is this functionally 1 cow per stall? If the lying space is so small, and there's bits of cow in the neighboring stalls that are compromising the occupancy of those lying spaces, is it even enough just to say 1 cow per stall?
No.
It is a complicated argument, because you can have a much better designed facility with more comfortable, generous lying spaces and overstock that facility and be in a better place than a normally stocked, compromised one.
Yeah.
Because you've got lying spaces that aren't actually functionally useful.
Yeah.
I'm arguing against myself here.
You are.
Okay. More cows per stall, which is, again, how we're mostly talking about stocking densities in free stalls around the world, means more milking.
Yep. More time
more
spent
cows
milking.
Going through the parlor or through the robot. And you usually don't change that. Yeah, when you add a few more cows to the pen.
You're not adding robots. You're not adding more stalls into the parlor.
Right.
You're not increasing the holding area size.
Right. So it takes longer to milk that pen of cows, and that means more time out of the pen, away from a place to rest.
Yep.
So this Canadian data shows, again, as stocking density increases, that we see a decrease in the ability of those cows to lie down. And as stocking density increases milking time. So time out of the pen increases and resting time decreases.
Yep.
So it's actually really hard to preserve 12 hours of rest if you're out of the pen for more than 3.5 hours a day.
Yeah.
And so those overstock farms find that challenging because, again, the milking center didn't change size. So you mentioned bunk space. Yeah, we've been talking about stocking density just as a function of access to a place to rest, but it's also access to a place to drink and a place to eat. And UBC, University of British Columbia, and our friends there did some, I think, really groundbreaking work on this a number of years ago here. This is Julie Hussey's work from 2006, where they showed the impact on group feeding behavior and individual cows in those groups when you shrunk bunk space. So you're going here at 32 inches of bunk space per cow. You see this pattern of bunk usage, which has these obvious peaks when fresh feed is delivered and after milking. And as you decrease the bunk space allowance to 24 inches per cow, to 16 inches per cow, to 8 inches per cow, what you really see is this compromise at the peak when that fresh feed is delivered. After milking, all of the cows simply can't get to the food.
Yeah, so it's looking at that bunk utilization, and cows are herd animals. They all like to eat at the same time. And what's really interesting is that when you do limit the amount of bunk space per cows, those cows that didn't get a chance to eat when that fresh feed is delivered, they're not going back and
they generally don't eat more later on. That is the key thing that we found out. We thought, oh, they'll work it out. You know, they only eat for 4.5 hours a day. There's plenty of time in the pen. They'll be able to go and eat more later on. They tend not to do that because they are herd animals and they're allelomimetic. They like to do the same thing at the same. So the intervening years, we've understood a lot more about overstocking and its impact on feeding behavior. And this is work from a number of people in our own group in cows with Lou Armentano, with Trevor de Vries that was originally at UBC and then moved to University of Guelph. Some really good work understanding that cows sort feed. When those first cows get to the bunk, they're eating a different ration from the subordinate cows that had to wait. They're getting a sorted, different ration to eat.
Yep.
There's an impact of that on milk components. So eating that varied ration, for every 10% refusal of long particles, milk fat can be decreased by 0.1% and protein by 0.04 from Trevor's work.
That has an impact on the milk check.
It has an impact on the milk check,
looking at components.
At the same time, through genomics and better feeding approaches, better nutrition, we've actually seen in our industry an increase in components. So, that's where kind of research butts heads with reality of what farmers are seeing. Again, the research is in these controlled environments. Maybe the milk components would be even better than they are now as a result of overstocking. For me, in animal behavior, just seeing the adaptations to feeding behavior are fascinating in overstocked situations. You tend to see this sort of decrease in feeding time. The cows are perhaps anxious. They increase their feeding rate, consume fewer, longer duration, larger meals. And what that does is
I'm going to say this probably changes something health-wise.
Yeah, it changes rumen function. So it changes the ability of those rumen microbes to process that feed, it changes rumen activity, has an impact down the line on de novo fatty acid production, which feeds into, again, milk components. And in our transition cows, we see that altered feeding behavior having an impact on blood metabolites, creating insulin resistance, elevated non-esterified fatty acid NEFR elevations, and signs of insulin resistance. So that is putting those cows at greater risk of metabolic disruption and disease in early lactation.
Yeah, so you are now starting to mention early lactation. Is this one stall per cow? Is this for the milking group? Is it for the early lactation transition cow groups?
I think as an industry, we've been able to sell with our advice on transition cows and fresh cows to protect stocking density in those key risk groups to a point where they've overstocked other groups and tried to avoid certainly the fresh cow group because of, again, this data that we've kind of accumulated over time and been able to sort of realize what we're doing. The impacts that we're seeing are based on data suggesting certainly less than 30 inches, probably less than 24 inches per typical Holstein cow is where we start to see these effects. And, put that into perspective, a 2-row pen normally stocked would be giving you around that 29, 30 inches per cow. Overstocked at 1.5 cows per stall, you'd be down to 18 inches. A 3-row pen starts at that.
Yeah.
So a 3-row pen, you're at 18. So if you start overstocking that, then you're into single digits in terms of inches of bunk space per cow. This is really some of our very little data showing the negative impact of overstocking on milk production. It's so hard to do. Cooks don't let us do the kind of extended studies on overstocking.
That's a research term.
It's the protective organization that oversees researchers and makes sure we don't do bad things to animals.
Yep.
They don't let us do the kind of extensive long-term overstocking studies that would show negative impacts on milk production and some of these longer-term issues. But Alex Bach in Spain had this amazing opportunity of a group of 47 herds all fed from a common feed source. So a centralized feed management system that distributed the TMR to these 47 herds. And very conveniently, these 47 herds stocked at different levels.
Oh, that is convenient.
So convenient. So you've got a range in terms of cows per stall. I've changed this slide a little bit to kind of put it into language that we kind of understand. And what he was able to show is a milk loss of about 1.1 to 1.3 pounds of milk per increase in stocking density of 0.1 cow per stall. So yes, there is a negative impact on overstocking on milk production. There's a negative impact on fertility. So this is John Sheffer's work. Again, we were looking at good performing herds.
Yep.
Excellent managed herds. What he was able to show is for every 1% increase in overstocking, cows per stall in the breeding pen, conception rate drops by 0.1%.
And I think it's just amazing how we are really talking minimal numbers, 1% of overstocking.
Yeah. So it's again just a function of looking at risk models, accounting for other factors, and highlighting that stocking density has a negative impact. So again, let's convert that into real terms and language we can all understand. So imagining a scenario where we move from 1 cow per stall to 1.5 cows per stall. So we've mentioned some of this along the way. Lying time decreases from a target of 12 hours a day to 10.2.
Similar from going from sand to mattress surfaces.
What that does is increase lameness risk. Not immediately, months later. So there's a time lag here. It reduces bunk space. In a 2-row pen, we said from 28 to 18 or 19 inches per cow, and we've shown that has negative impacts on milk components, on de novo fatty acid production, and insulin resistance and metabolic disease. It decreases conception rate, so that 0.1 per 1%. As you go from 1 cow per stall to 1.5 cows per stall, that's a 5% drop in conception rate.
And that's something you will notice.
5 points. So you go from 40% conception rate to 35. Okay, so that's a big drop. It decreases milk production from that data that we showed you, 6 pounds. So it's a 6 pound per cow per day drop in milk.
So you may be seeing more milk in the milk tank.
Yep.
But you have more cows producing less milk.
The group makes more milk because there's more cows, but each cow in the group produces less milk.
And I'm guessing that's not very good from an economic and a sustainable approach.
There's pros and cons. Yeah, there's this immediate feel-good effect of shipping more milk and getting more money. But over the longer term, each cow is performing less well.
And there's a lot more inputs going into those cows.
Yeah, so imagining a well-designed 2-row pen, following our recommendations. What happens to water space in that 1 to 1.5 cow per stall jump? You go from basically our recommendation of 3.6 inches of trough perimeter per cow to 2.4. And we've seen thirsty cows at 2.4.
Yes.
We've seen cows leave those pens seeking water on the way to the parlour. You go from 60 square feet of alley area to 40.
And I'm guessing that might not be good in terms of manure in the pen.
You got more cows, they're producing more manure, so that manure is deeper. You see dirtier cows as a result of that, maybe more risk of things like digital dermatitis. You go from a cow lying in a bed, each bed on average 12 hours a day, to an overstock situation where the average occupancy of the stall is 18 hours.
That's not good.
That's not good because you're using a bedding material. You have a warm cow lying on that bedding material for much longer each day. Those bacteria are going to incubate. They're going to grow faster at higher levels. And that's, again, why we tend to see mastitis outbreaks. Nothing changed. Yeah, we didn't change the stalls. We didn't change the type of bedding. You changed the number of cows in the pen. And that incubation puts the cow at risk of being exposed to a higher bacterial load.
I'm guessing when you add more cows to a barn, it doesn't improve air quality.
Oh, we had to get back to ventilation, didn't we?
Yeah,
yes,
we
it
did.
does reduce air volume per cow. So 2,500 cubic feet per cow to just a little over 1,600. So it compromises
air quality
and heat abatement and cooling. So these are sort of kind of real numbers of the potential for bad things to happen. Short-term gain, long-term pain,
I've
Courtney.
heard that plenty of times.
These are other things that are going to be
saying.
added to my headstone, yeah? So it takes days to see an increase in the milk check. It's immediate. It takes months to years to see the accumulated negative impacts that we're describing here. And it's not unsurprising then that farmers find it hard to join the two together, to realize that what they're doing with overstocking is creating these repro issues or elevated culling rates or increased lameness rates that they see 2 years down the line.
Because we do have some really good managers out there that can make this work
Managing
for a while.
the heck out of this situation.
But is it worth managing the heck out of this situation?
So what do managers do to beat the odds? Because we see so many examples where what the research is telling us doesn't appear apparent in the performance of herds that are overstocking. So what do? They're very predictable in terms of their delivery of feed and their milking times, so the cows know precisely what's happening every day, and they can adapt. Again, cows are super adaptable, so they know, okay, well, the fresh feed's coming here, or the push-up occurs at this time, and so they can adapt to that kind of situation. Without a doubt, most of them use more bedding.
Yep.
Yeah, if you've got more cows, that 12 to 18 hours of occupancy a day, that bedding's going to get kicked out. You're going to need to use more to compensate.
Increasing bedding frequency.
Yep, and that helps you lessen the risk of mastitis and poor udder health. In those compromised feeding situations, they push feed up more frequently, or they may even deliver feed more than once a day. And so you can give those cows that don't get to the first sitting when that fresh feed is delivered, if they're blocked out, if you push up, 45 minutes to an hour later, for those second sitting cows, they get that pushed up, better quality, less sorted ration to consume. The pushing up smarter versus just more frequently, I think can make a real difference.
Yeah.
Providing more water sources. So we talked about if your water access is compromised in the pen, then oftentimes there'll be a water on the way to the parlor in the crossway or something like that. These herds have learned how to do really good hoof care, so they're aggressive at foot bathing. They are really good at hoof trimming and recognizing lameness as soon as it occurs and getting cows treated.
And then they've focused their attentions into the parlor and become very efficient there.
Yep, improved milking routines, more efficiency in the parlor can lessen the negative impact of spending more time out of the pen. More sophisticated ventilation systems that we've talked about at length, and culling more cows. We are still at a situation in our industry where about 36% of the cows leave every year. That can cover a lot of ills.
Yeah.
When you're turning over cows that frequently, cows that fail in this system can be removed and replaced. Bad outcomes aren't necessarily inevitable because of that good management. So again, we see plenty of examples of this, but neither are improved economic returns. And I think perhaps we do a poor job of investigating the true cost of overstocking.
I have a feeling you're going to show us what those true costs are.
We like to do this. We have partial budget exercises with our students, and so this is one of the
fourth-year vet students.
we make them do the work. Yep. But investigating scenarios where you're having to manage more cows it's kind of fascinating, and I think on an individual farm basis you can absolutely explore the true economics of the situation, because when you add more cows, you have to have more labor to manage them.
There's more manpower.
Yep. You often have longer milking times, and that's higher parlor running costs. There's electricity involved and use of chemicals for cleaning, for teat dip, and so on.
You mentioned that more bedding.
More bedding we've talked about. More manure. That manure ends up in a lagoon. You have to spend more money on pumping that out and putting it on the fields. More cows to breed.
Well, I get back to labor.
Yep. More shots, more semen. More cows to vaccinate. Vaccines are relatively cheap, but you still got to pay for it and do it. Some critical things. You probably didn't change the size of your dry cow barn.
Oh, or the calves. Don't forget about the calves.
Or the calf barn.
Or the heifers.
Or the heifer barn. And the transition cow area in general. And as you add more cows, you've got more throughput and more pressure on those areas. And, overstocking not only the lactating cow population, but also the dry cows, the transition cows.
And the young stock.
So there's got to be a cost associated with doing all those things. So that's why we like spreadsheets, Courtney. So this is a spreadsheet exploring a situation on a 2,500 cow dairy that was overstocking at 1.5 cows per stall. Imagining a scenario where we tried to convince that farm don't do that, to reduce to 1 cow per stall, and looking at all of the different increases and decreases in revenue, increases in decreases in costs. And so there's quite a lot of big list of decreased costs here, and we can balance this argument by increasing milk per cow on this farm under this set of circumstances by 1.5 pounds of milk.
Okay.
That's less than the 6 that Alex Bark talks about. Yeah. So 1.5 pounds makes this viable to say, don't overstock.
I feel like there's a but somewhere.
It's under the circumstances that we identified on this farm. So there's a number of assumptions that you have to build into this model. We had feed costs at 15 cents per pound of TMR. Somewhat typical of what we're seeing right now, but obviously feed costs do fluctuate.
Yep.
We imagine that turnover rate would reduce, and going from 1.5 to 1 cow per stall from 42 to 32% here. Mastitis rate and lameness rate would decrease, as would the number of fresh cow health events. So we have to put a cost to those events, and then imagine, what kind of percent drop we would see. So again, assumptions. Bedding, sand bedding at $15 per ton, going from 80 pounds per stall per day to 40, which is generally the sort of range that we see of sand usage. And then fewer workers. So understanding that with more cows, we would have more workers on that farm. We would be able to let some of those workers go.
Yeah.
So those were the assumptions.
Okay.
And when you visit the farm and have these discussions, you can change them. It's a spreadsheet. You can interact with it and produce numbers that the farm is comfortable with. It's interesting to see the impact of milk price on this. So you mentioned right at the start that we're back into a cycle of overstocking in our industry because of
the pandemic.
And what did the pandemic do? It produced a rapid decrease in milk price. So when milk price drops, it makes sense to a farm
add more cows to get more milk.
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, that's not when you should overstock.
Huh.
Because you're balancing the milk produced from the extra cows against the lost milk per cow, actually at higher milk prices, you have to have more milk per cow. There needs to be a greater milk per cow differential for this to balance the budget. At lower milk prices, you don't need as much milk to balance the budget. Okay. So kind of interesting to see that, we're about 17 cents per 100. The differential would be about 8 pounds of milk per cow per day to balance the budget. That's kind of getting at the top end of the range here. So at very high milk prices, we do expect to see farmers overstocking and reaping the reward of that extra milk, because even if you're losing some milk per cow per day, you're still ahead.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the economic reality that I think farmers need to understand and investigate under their own set of circumstances. We do have really good managers. We have really good, well-designed herds, and they can get away with some overstocking, actually with very limited negative impact on the cows. We've kind of seen that. But again, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I was going to say, we are advocating for the cow here as well.
Right, because the science says there aren't any good things that happen to the cow when you overstock. Mm-hmm. You're relying on her adaptability to cope.
Yeah.
And is that where we want to be in this conversation with social trust, of being asked to be left to do the right thing for the cow? And I'm concerned about that. Yeah. So I'm concerned that if we don't take action to sort of address our overstocking concerns, that there could be an oversight reaction to this.
That doesn't sit well with
right.
the dairy industry.
And again, we mentioned north of the border, Canada currently sets a standard of 1.2 cows per stall. And based on this data that has been accumulated in the intervening years, their rules and regs are changing. So they are imposing in proaction a step down, which will basically go to 1 cow per stall by 2031. And so that's an example of an industry that's looking at the data and saying, okay, to maintain social trust, to address the sustainability argument, we know good herd managers can manage around this, but industry-wide, we're going to just sort of say, doing the right thing for the cows sets us at a goal of removing overstocking of any form, of getting back to 1 cow per stall. So that was our take on the sensitive issue, Courtney, of overstocking, because I think it is such a difficult topic to bring up with dairy farmers. They're obviously, trying to stay in business. They're trying to pay the bills. The tendency to overstock is ever present. We're kind of in the midst of one of these cycles where I think people are doing it and reaping some of the rewards. But I would ask us all to maybe examine the actual economics of doing this in terms of the increased costs of that, and the social trust aspects of it in terms of doing the right thing for the dairy cow.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cook. I think you gave us a lot to think about in terms of overstocking, both from the manager's point of view, but also that of the cows, and where as an industry we should go.
Thanks for joining us.
The Dairyland Initiative is supported by industry leaders who are advancing cow comfort worldwide. We would like to say a special thank you to our premier sponsor, Saputo, who is providing the global community with high-quality dairy products made from high-quality milk from healthy and well-cared-for animals. We'd also like to say thank you to our other sponsors, SaveCows.com, Zinpro, GPS Dairy Consulting, 40 Barn, SureGain Trow Nutrition, Munters, J&D Manufacturing, VES Artex, Ventec, and Kestrel Instruments. Thanks for tuning in to the Dairyland Initiative podcast. Want more Dairyland Initiative? Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on our socials, and visit our website for all of the latest recommendations in dairy cattle housing and management. See you next time.